Hello there, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of 12 remarkable conversations that I'm having with male soul stewards from all over the world, these extraordinary men who are transmitting unconditional love, empathy, and vast waves of spiritual intelligence, encouraging us, inspiring us, enthusing us into living a new level of living, and thereby creating a brave new world. Okay, welcome everybody. There are people tuning in from all over the world. David Hamilton, some of you know him, I think. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to officially introduce you to all to Dr. David Hamilton. David has a PhD in organic chemistry and worked in the pharmaceutical industry, but being inspired by the placebo effect, he left the industry with the choice to write books and inform people about how they can harness their mind and emotions to improve their health. Now, David is the author of 10 books, including The Little Book of Kindness, How Your Mind Can Heal Your Body, I Heart Me, and the Amazon bestseller, The 5 Side Effects of Kindness. David is also the Kindness Czar, which I was very intrigued by, for the Psychologist magazine, and also writes for Soul and Spirit and Kindred Spirit magazines. David was featured in the award-winning documentary Heal and appears regularly in the media on Channel 4's Sunday Brunch, CBS's Sunday Morning, and it goes on and on and on and on because he's a very illustrious gentleman. And I've had the great fortune of knowing him for a number of years, and I've always been just so in awe of what you bring to us. So, you know, from all of us, I say thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Stuart. That was a really lovely introduction. I love when you speak. There's an authenticity and a gentleness to the way that you say what you say, and you mean what you say. You can almost feel the intention and the compassion when you speak with that you really mean what you're saying, and I could feel it, and it's such just a really lovely introduction. So thank you so much.
Oh, bless you.
For that. It was very, very sweet.
Bless you. I'm revving up for my TED Talk on October the 16th.
Yes.
I've succumbed. So you know, I believe that we're engaging in the revolution of the empaths at this time. And so the whole of my work is my new project, or rather the extrapolation of an original project, is called The Voice of Change, because of the nature of change that's taking place. Yeah. And the change, of course, is the fact that we're accepting that we can be authentic, and authenticity is a beautiful route towards sovereignty. Hence my book, Diana, The Voice of Change. So David, it's absolutely fascinating to always listen to you. We've just had a pre-show chat, you see, so we're warmed up. When did the fascination about the interface between spirit and science really begin for you?
Well, do you know, in a really roundabout kind of way, when I was about 11 years old, my mum was going through postnatal depression or postpartum depression. And that would have been after my youngest of 3 sisters was born. I have 3 sisters. I'm the only boy. And the youngest of them, in the mid to late 70s, my mum had gone through postnatal depression. It wasn't understood in the 70s the way it is today. And my mum wasn't really treated kindly, I suppose, by the psychiatrist who ultimately implied that my mum should give herself a shake. Now, asking a woman who has postnatal depression to give herself a shake, I guess, is like asking someone with a broken hip to just run it off and it'll be fine. So my mum, she struggled with her self-esteem and the depression, and it really made her feel that she's just not a strong person, that other people must feel this way and they just brush it off. My mum began to feel really small. And I just felt this compassion. I wanted to help my mum. And I remember about 11 years old, I just started high school. And the teacher was taking us to the library. And this might sound kind of odd, but a book fell off the shelf right beside me, The Magic Power of Your Mind by a gentleman called Walter Germain. And now I just took it. I thought I had an instinct that would help my mum. Now, I didn't know that you're supposed to join the library. You know, you get a little yellow card and stamp. I'd never been in a library, so I just literally took the book from the shelf, put it in my bag, thinking, I will borrow this. That's what you do in a library. We still have it. But, you know, it totally helped my mum. Well, I've still borrowed it, I suppose. It totally helped my mum. And it didn't cure depression in a day, but what it did is it gave her tools and strategies like, you know, meditation and affirmations that helped her to navigate a course through some of the difficult days. So when I was a teenager, my mum would often talk about, you know, meditation and affirmation. She would pump her fist sometimes and say, I can do it. Mind over matter. It's all in the mind. And we would have these conversations about mind and reality and the power of the mind and thoughts. And I'm so intrigued by this. It was like something lit up inside of me. Like, this is my thing. I just love talking about the mind and thoughts and reality. My mum did as well. In fact, no, my mum and I only talked to each other about it. My mum didn't talk to any of her family or friends, just me about this stuff. So wind the clock forward a few years, and I've finished my PhD. I'm working for one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, AstraZeneca, actually. And my colleagues are celebrating a clinical trial because one of the drugs we're working on, cardiovascular drugs, has a particular efficacy. And I'm looking at how many people were improved on the placebo, and I'm like, score, yes. And all I was interested in was just why so many people improved on the placebo and why and how that worked. So in my spare time, I began to research and understand what happens when you have a different state of consciousness, or you believe something, or you imagine something, or intend or will something. What happens inside your brain and what happens inside the body? And I began to find some really solid scientific facts, which were appealing to me, because then I could talk to other scientific people and they couldn't really denigrate it, because they couldn't say this is rubbish, because here it is in the scientific journals, kind of thing. And that helped me to realize that, you know, I've always known in my heart that I'm supposed to be a teacher and educate about the mind and thought and consciousness. Ever since I was a child, I kind of knew that. It's much clearer now. But I think when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, realizing that there was actually solid science, it wasn't just stuff that I just intuited and philosophized. There was actually factual stuff that could help me to almost be a communicator in forming a bridge between the mainstream and the spiritual world, which seems to be two separate things, where one group doesn't understand the language of the other and the other group doesn't understand their language. So I kind of sit in the middle and I feel I can communicate with both groups. I'm quite happy over there, quite happy over there, quite happy in the middle, but I just sort of feel like I translate and communicate between the two. Kind of long answer to your question, I suppose.
No, it's beautiful because it introduces us, you know, because we're observing you, so we feel the vibration of what you're talking about and how wonderfully impassioned you are. So that there's always this beautiful brilliance and vitality about what you say. How could anybody not be engaged in David Hamilton, right, guys? Those of you listening in. So isn't that extraordinary that that moment of kismet took place? There you were at the 11 years of age. It was almost as though you're genie, you know, because as you know, I peddle angels. And I believe that we each have a guardian angel. And in Italy, it was known as, the guardian was known as the genie that gave the great one genius. So your genie was, isn't that interesting? So, you know, for example, we go back to Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, Giotto. They didn't believe that they did it. They believed that what they were simply doing is making themselves available through their own métier, through their craft skills, by honing the skills. And then they just let go and allow divine inspiration, inspirazione, of divine influence to move through them. But it was their genie that did all the work, gave them the genius.
Wow. Here's a little kind of semi-funny, I don't so much know if it's a story, but one of my dear friends, Angela, her two sons, Italian surname, you know, Italian names, and they they were moving back. They were moving back. They were living in the Middle East, and they were moving back to the UK to live. And she wanted them to embrace a bit more of the holistic world, but they're very mainstream and factual. So she Googled. She decided that she wanted them to be able to listen to a particular type of person. So she Googled scientist who believes in angels and is male. And up Google, a couple of pages further on, up came me, and there was an association there. Right. And so I did a little coaching session. And in that way, because I brought hard science to spiritual subjects and showed that they're really just different ways of looking at the same thing, we actually became friends over that. And I did a little coaching session, and her sons are much more open to this kind of stuff now because I guess because of the way I communicate it, I suppose. Yeah. Scientist that believes in angels. It was such a nice thing to Google.
It's yeah, and I mean that's presumably is this information of some pedigree? I mean, when did it happen?
Well, this would have been about 10 years ago. She would have Googled that.
So were you doing any work with any angel mediums or angel emissaries?
Do you know, actually, possibly. Kyle Gray and I had done a little series of talks. In fact, I think we did the closing keynote at the World Angel Congress in Switzerland, I think, called Science and Angels. So we did a couple of joint
I seem to remember reading that, you see, and I thought, wow, that would be an interesting gig.
I think, yeah.
You stand really beautifully astride both hemispheres. So you can access the creativity of right brain and all the intuitive skills and the sensitivity and sensibility thereof, but also you have this wonderful way of being able to translate David was just showing me he's doing this extraordinary degree in advanced mathematics. So he was just showing me a list of his equations, and there you have them. And
that was today's work.
I immediately moved into partial trauma because I can remember math lessons at school and how Mr. Neville would stand behind me in his mortarboard and gown, and whenever he could, he would hit me around the head because he could see that I wasn't able to do it. Anyway, back to where we were. So the period that we've just been through must have been a period of great interest, great concern, but also one of keen deliberation by yourself. Of course, I'm referring to the nature of COVID-19 and the global pause. I refuse to use that word that begins with L, the global pause, because as we know that many of us found the global pause a time for really dropping in and having a very unique conversation with the Divine Mother. So do you have any perceptions about why COVID-19 as a contagion should come along?
A number, actually. What I have focused on a lot is spreading kindness and the spirit and attitude of kindness, because what I noticed when all of this happened is an outpouring of kindness and compassion, and more written about and spoken about. I've never done so many live online talks or any talks about kindness in my whole life since all of this happened. I mean, literally the majority of all the interviews I do, it's to do with kindness and the science of it, you know, how kindness improves mental health and some of the research on it, but even how, you know, the feelings that accompany an act of kindness. You know, how does an act of kindness feel? Now, the way that an act of kindness feels, that feeling itself creates massive physiological effects that are actually the exact opposite of stress, because stress is a feeling. The physical effects of stress are not because of a situation you find yourself in, they're due to how the situation feels to you, how it feels, and it's the feeling that generates the physical effects of stress. But kindness is a feeling that generates the opposite effects. So I often say that kindness is the opposite of stress. And so despite what's been happening, what I have seen is a shift towards more talking about kindness than ever before, and more awareness of stories of compassion and kindness. When we used to clap for carers, it was a global outpouring in the UK of recognising the compassion and people looking after their neighbours, people walking down the street and looking after their elderly neighbours. Do you need any shopping? You know, many people were doing that. And I think we've kind of got so used to it now, we've kind of forgotten that we're still doing these things for each other. And you're talking about contagion. You know, the R number for kindness is between 4 and 5. Kindness is about the most contagious thing. Now, what that means is, you know, the R number of coronavirus is currently about place to place. At its peak in the UK, its peak, I think it was about 2.5. It's about 1 point something now. What that basically means is one person will infect 2.5, who will infect 2.5, who will infect 2.5. So at 3 stages, you've got 2.5 times 2.5 times 2, which is about 15.6 in 3 stages. But that's an R number of 2.5, right? So 2.5. But kindness has an R number between 4 and 5, closer to 5. Now, what that means, and this has been shown in science to 3 waves, that when you be kind to someone, because of how that person now feels, it might be gratitude, it might be relief, but it was something, the spirit of kindness has touched them. Because of how that person feels, research shows that person will now be kind or kinder to 5 people over the next 24 hours because of how you made them feel. But that's at one stage. Each of those 5 will be kind or kinder to 5 further people because of how they feel. So now you have 25 at 2 stages, but each of those 25 will be kind or kinder to 5 further people. So what you get is 125. So at 3 stages, the coronavirus has infected, 15.6 people. At 3 stages, kindness infected 125. Wow. That's when exponential of something really powerful like kindness really comes into its own, because coronavirus hasn't touched every household, but kindness has. And so this
is staggering. Have you written this?
Yes.
In your book or in blog?
I wrote about it in the 5 side effects of kindness and in the little book of kindness. You know,
it's immensely topical.
It's relevant now. It's topical now. I think most people didn't notice that part of the book when I wrote it.
But now that's interesting, isn't it? That it was camouflaged, even though obviously you inject not just great specificity, but also all of your vitality and interest, your curiosity is injected into it, so they would feel it. But you know, we've talked about it often about how certain information affects a certain group of people and not another. You know, and I can go into so many sociological expositions of this. You know, like for example, one of my people is one of the world's leading cellists and was playing at Carnegie Hall in New York City, and he played I think 4 concerts over four days and was paid gazillions of dollars. And you know, it was attended by the literati and the cognoscenti and the intelligentsia of New York City and the Eastern Seaboard. Anyway, so he's very celebrated. And then the artistic director said, "We're really interested. Would you mind not using your cello, which is a Guarneri from 1729, it's part of the Stradivarius family, but use this cello, dress as a bum, dress as a street person, and go and stand outside this subway in Brooklyn, and we just want to see how many people take any notice of you." You know, because he is a virtuoso. Wow. I mean, when he plays, it's just, you feel as though you want to cry, shout, weep, laugh, you know, the whole thing. So he did, and he inside 2 hours, he earned $4.
Oh.
So anyway, the point of the story is that it all depends on people's awareness or awakened consciousness, whether they see it or not. And obviously, you know, what we're partly hinting at is the fact that we've turned the travesty or the awfulness, the horror of what COVID has been about, because it has been a very real contagion for many, many people, as we know, and people have lost their lives. What we've done is to take the substance of it and we've converted it into a future-facing aspect of greater power than anything could ever come out of the scientific COVID realization.
Yeah.
I must get the book, because I would love to annotate what you've just spoken about and use it use it with your permission in relation to broadcasting this fact much more specifically.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy. I'll send a copy through to you. I feel even now, I think we've got so used to the whole pandemic situation that I think, maybe this is time to remind ourselves that part of the reasons why we're trying to not transmit the virus is because we're looking out for each other. That's why I've been, trying to do the best I can, to minimize the chances of if I was to contract something. I've not been that worried about my own health, but I've been concerned about if, for example, I was to contract it unknowingly, then I wouldn't want to pass that on to anyone else. So what I'm trying to allow to guide me is constantly checking back and trying to be kind. And therefore, that's why what I think we almost have to remember at the moment is this is about another way for us to be kind to each other. Given that a real global situation, this is an opportunity for us to extend our compassion and kindness for each other. I know people personally who've been touched very, very severely with COVID, so I think it's an opportunity for us to deepen our compassion for each other, and imagine what it must be like for people who have suffered and lost their lives, and to take what we can do with kindness and just try to get through this thing as fast as we can, while looking out for each other and helping our neighbours when they need a hand, and looking out for family. Reach, if we're not able to go and see people, then pick up the phone, pick up FaceTime or a call, and reach out to people and let them know that you're here and that you love them and you care for them. And let's, intensify our efforts to let the people in our lives know that we care. I think that's what this one of the many things this situation is inviting us to do.
I think it's very beautiful, and I absolutely concur. And I was reading an article this morning by a Swedish doctor, because as we know, the emergence of corona in Sweden has been so minimalized, so that they didn't go into lockdown. Every business was left open, so there was a flowing economy, and they recovered very, very quickly, largely as a result of their celebration of life, their kindness and compassion for one another. The Swedes, this is a sweeping generalization, but the Swedish people seem to have the ability of a sang-froid, a well-bredness, where they look after each other. And in fact, I have an amazing client who is a long-term client, who is a mentee of mine, and she has created the only academy of compassion in the world, and she's based in Stockholm with two extraordinary women alongside her. She's a constructionist psychologist, and it gives me inspiration that I will mention you to her, because I believe that they're planning a conference next year, and it would be great to have you there to reveal your kindness project. From this article, I also deduce something that I've known about for years, and I don't know if you have anything to say about it, that there was also a form of correctional therapy that was offered to de-stress people within Sweden. And the note was that with the enhancement of T cells, that the T cell count was so pronounced around the immune system that people simply were not getting sick. And so they were being taken through de-stress meditation processes or physical therapies, so that they could just produce caring, loving, humorous, compassionate, empathic thoughts.
Wow. There is research, Stuart, that shows that the immune system is directionally sensitive to the contents of our mind, what we're intending, what we believe, and what we feel. What I mean by directionally sensitive is it is entirely possible through using exercises, visualizations to make the immune system go up or down for whichever purpose. I mean, you don't always want it to go up, because some people with autoimmune conditions, allergies, for example, sometimes you want particular immune cells to go down. And it seems to be from research that the immune system is directionally sensitive. In other words, it does seem to respond. There was research that looked at the one of the most abundant antibodies in the body is secretory immunoglobulin A. Now, that's for the test at the end, okay? So, or SIGA. It's an antibody that looks like a Y, but a double Y. So it's a Y like that and a Y at the bottom as well. So a double Y shape. And I say that so that people can visualize it. And it lines the mucous membranes. And scientists found that if people just imagined multiplying the numbers, the count, multiplying the numbers of SIG, visualize them giving birth to more, or some of them parachuting into the body, then the levels would increase quite significantly, even during a 5-minute daily meditation. Over a period of 3 weeks, the levels dramatically increased. Another study found that people could specifically increase levels of particular immune cells over others. Scientists now tried that in a randomized controlled clinical trial of women with breast cancer. I think it was 96 women. It might have been 98. I'm sure it was 96. And they were all going through the same treatment. It was mainstream treatment. There was chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, and all hormone treatment. And all of them got the same treatment. But half of them, in addition to the treatment, they did an extra short daily visualization where they visualized their immune cells, like their killer cells or T cells, swimming through the body and grabbing hold of and destroying, like piranha fish eating their prey, destroying cancer cells. Mm. Now, in the women who didn't do the visualizations, the levels of many of the key immune cells dropped through 4 cycles of chemotherapy. Not in those who visualized. The levels stayed abundantly high, to the point that the scientists leading the study reported in the scientific paper, published in Breast, which is one of the leading breast cancer journals in the world, cancer journals in the world. And they said that even after 4 cycles of chemotherapy, the immune system was showing high levels of cytotoxicity against cancer. Now, cytotoxicity really just means it is killing, the immune system is killing cancer cells far more efficiently in those who visualized than in those who didn't. Now, the study wasn't about this seeing who fared better than anyone else. That wasn't the purpose of the study. Was an immunological study. It was to study the impact of visualization on the immune system in people receiving cancer treatment. And what the study basically said is visualization was enhancing the efficiency and power of the immune system over and above its normal. I mean, isn't that remarkable?
Amazing, 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 yes. Amazing. And it reminds me of many things, that, you know, the production of sputum, the production of mucus in the mouth. Many years ago, I met Professor Escudero, who was an orthopedic surgeon in southern Spain, who conducted all of his operations with no anesthesia.
Wow.
What he did was to work with the patient for 4 weeks before surgery and introduce them to visualization processes and breath processes so that they could actually lower the heartbeat, but always by the production of spittle or sputum in their mouths. And I watched one operation where a woman's leg was drilled into with no anesthesia. She needed to have a certain rod placed because there had been a very bad fracture a number of years before and the bones had not knitted properly. So she needed to have this rod inserted just for a period of time. And she had both operations with no anesthesia. I mean, literally the whole of the whole of her leg was incised and then this rod inserted right into the bone. And
That's
she felt
amazing.
no pain whatsoever. So there, you know, there are these remarkable situations. 20 years ago, maybe more, I remember having many AIDS patients coming to me within the entertainment industry. And a number of them were actually weaned off retroviral drugs, that they were producing so much healthy T cell count through the visualization processes that we did. That anyway, so we know this thing matters. One of the things that I was sort of fascinated about when I was considering us meeting this evening was the fact that you're well known for being this wonderful Dr. John Dee, you know, as Dr. David Hamilton, of being able to stand between the worlds of the metaphysical magic that illuminates and also the earthy nature of substantial science. When people know this of you, do you get a lot of people saying, by the way, I've got this problem, do you have any resolutions? I mean, I'm sure that must happen. Does it happen?
Oh yeah, yeah. I get lots of people asking me the visualizations for X, Y, or Z. Yeah. And what I usually tend to do for people is explain the principles of building a visualization. Right. In other words, and the way it works is, like, your brain in many ways in your body can't really make a distinction between whether something's actually happening for real or whether you're imagining it happening for real. And that's actually underlying reason why the placebo effect works. I mean, the placebo, if you take a placebo for pain, for example, it's a sugar pill, but you think it's a painkiller, then your brain produces what it needs to produce to deliver a reduction in pain. Because your mind, or the contents of your consciousness, your mind is pointed towards, I will have a reduction in pain. So your brain, therefore, out of all of its chemicals and substances that it has, it chooses the specific one or ones that will deliver exactly what you're expecting to happen, i.e. reduction in pain. When a person visualizes something happening, something very similar happens. The direction that the mind is pointed in through your beliefs or your intention, your imagination, it causes the brain to produce what it needs to produce to deliver the result that you're imagining. That's underlying reason why the women in that breast cancer study, why their immune systems were working more powerfully, because they were imagining the immune system like piranha fish and Pac-Men and Pac-Women destroying cancer cells. So the mind was pointed towards cancer cells being destroyed. So therefore the brain, and therefore now triggering the immune system, was doing what it needed to do to deliver the result that the person was imagining. So when I explain to people visualizations, I suggest that you can visualize anything you want. There's not just the one correct visualization for arthritis, for example, or for pain, or for cancer. There's not the one single. There's whatever way you want to imagine the final result. So whatever makes sense to you. So for example, let's say a person had arthritis in the knee or swelling in the knee. Now, one person might imagine that area being gently sanded down, really, really gently and smoothly, like one fine layer at a time. Another person might just imagine, and then afterwards the area is freely moving. Another person might imagine the inflammation being reduced as if you've just pulled the air out of a balloon and it goes. And another person might imagine just putting oil in there. But as long as all three people imagine that the joint is now moving freely, then all three people will get more or less the same result from their repetitive visualizations. And what I'm really getting to is, as long as your mind is pointed towards the end result and you're repetitively doing the visualization, then you're stimulating the brain and the body's natural resources to the best that it can to go in that direction. When I say the best that it can, I'm not necessarily meaning that someone should visualize instead of taking medical advice. But in addition to whatever strategies, whether it's mainstream or not, that you're taking, by using your mind as well, you're using your body, you're stimulating your brain and your body's natural resources to move you in assistance with whatever else you're doing, to move the organism, which is you, in the direction. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yes. Now, it reminds me of a story. I mean, maybe we've talked about this before. Again, it's some time ago with a client of mine who was one of the world's leading opera singers, and she married late and had Tom. Tom was a beautiful child, but at the age of 7, they discovered that he had an inoperable brain tumor. Oh. So I was called in to be with him, to provide him with healing as a movement back to wholeness, whatever I could do. So I introduced to Tom this visualization process that he was to do whenever he wanted to, but principally 4 times a day. And so we timed that. So it became a game. He was by this time 8. So he was still continuing to live, and he was in hospital in his private ward. Anyway, so what he would do in an 8-year-old boy's mind is that he would be in the cockpit of an aeroplane, and he would fly around something that was called Mount Tumor. And then when he felt it was significant, he would press the buttons and missiles would go off into Mount Tumor to disintegrate Mount Tumor. What we wanted to do was to dissolve and to disintegrate.
Amazing.
And then one day something weird happened, which was, I think, the 3rd meditation in the afternoon, that he was doing the same thing. So he would breathe first to calm his body down into alpha, and then he would begin the visualization process. But on this occasion, he pressed the buttons and nothing happened. So he flew around again, pressed the buttons in his joystick, and nothing would happen. So he called in a squadron. Okay, and there they are whizzing around Mount Tumor, and at a certain point in his microphone or in walkie-talkie, whatever, he said, "Now press," and nothing happened. And then they noticed that there was this huge sound, or he was noticing that there was this huge sound coming from behind him, and a huge bomb came and completely blew apart his tumor. He opened his eyes thinking, "Oh my goodness me," rang the nursing staff. They came, they immediately took him down and put him through, oh dear, what's he called? The magnetic detector. And they discovered he had no tumor.
Wow.
So his mother called me and said, "You must come." And I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, yes, but you've got to come. We're having a party. So I went, and there was little Tom, and he called me over and he said, "Guess what?" And then he told me the story, and he said, "You know who sent that, don't you?" Wow. Anyway, so the point is that we're moving into a field of immense neuroplasticity, into a field of metaphysical, miraculous, and magical energies that can bring about fundamental change in our bodies.
Yeah, and talking about that, I use that in visualizations as well. I mean, because you can visualize in any way, as long as, like, Mount Tumor, for example, someone else might visualize a tumor in a different way. It doesn't matter, as long as the outcome is no tumor. So you can visualize angels. So sometimes when I visualize, if someone needs like more physical support, I imagine sometimes an angel with big golden wings walking into the person and embodying them, and all the light and energy from the angels is literally diffusing into the body. I've done it for my own body at times, but when I send distant healing, when I pray for people, oftentimes I see and I imagine angels and light, but little wings and little golden energies of pure consciousness. But I visualize like magic and angels, because I believe that all of reality is contained within consciousness. And this is my own call this my own philosophy, which is very similar to a lot of philosophers have a similar idea of the world. And so I believe that I see the world in a magical way. And even though we live in a physical time-space reality, it doesn't mean that the underlying principles that organize that are not fancy and magical. So I allow myself, I enjoy the believing and I enjoy imagining that which animates all physical substance is magical. And its energy and its consciousness. So when I'm praying and visualizing, it's less mechanical and scientific, and it's more magical and more Harry Potter and more angelic. And that's what I visualize when I'm visualizing for myself or for someone else, because that's what I believe is the underlying substance of reality, is consciousness and magic itself.
The animating principle of the universe, the anima mundi, as it was called in medievalism, which was really castigated in 1623 by Isaac Newton, who said that it didn't matter, meaning it was not of the mater, it was not of the mother. In other words, that the planet was merely a lump of matter hurtling through space. It had no soul. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we have a scientist in the form of Dr. David Hamilton reinserting that we withdrew from because we desacralized nature in that moment. We desacralized the divine feminine. And now here he is reinserting all of this magic back into what we once believed in, all the, what is it, 450, 470 years later?
Yeah,
so,
well, but
it's amazing.
Well, Stuart, that the mainstream idea is that consciousness is produced by the brain. But despite what people assume, that's not actually a fact. There's no fact there in science. In fact, the philosopher David Chalmers really gave this problem the correct name. He calls it's called the hard problem of consciousness. And so many young people and older people just assume that science says that consciousness is a production of brain chemistry, but all science actually shows is a correlation between when someone has an experience, here is what the brain is doing, but that doesn't tell you what the experience feels like. And consciousness is more about your subjective experience. And so David Chalmers called it the hard problem of consciousness that science is nowhere near cracking. So, you can just as well say that I believe that consciousness is the fundamental guiding principle of the universe with just the same level of belief as someone says that consciousness is produced by the brain, because we don't actually have any evidence or any real understanding of does that actually happen. And in fact, more and more, the more research we're doing, the more we're coming away from that idea that consciousness is produced by the brain, and more, in my opinion, moving towards a spiritual idea, what has always been believed in spirituality, that reality is contained within consciousness. I mean, when you look at the room around you, that's not what's actually there. That's a construct based on how your brain processes data. Even color itself. You look at my top and it's blue. I would say it's not blue. It's only blue because of the cones, the three cones in the eyes, the photoreceptors in the eye, that when light bounces off this top, because of the physical structure of those cones, the top appears blue. But to a species that only has 2 cones or 4 cones, it will be completely different. I mean, a foraging insect, you look at a flower and it might be like a yellow flower about that size. And you say to this foraging insect, oh, look at that lovely yellow flower. And if it could speak English, it would say, what are you talking about? It's not a wee yellow flower. It's like 20 feet wide and it's rotating ultraviolet plumes. And the foraging insect will say, what, is that all you see? You just see that piddly wee, yellow wee, tiny wee thing. Do you not see this 20 feet wide, swirling, magnetic, pulsing ultraviolet thing? And the foraging insect must feel sorry for us. Is that all you see? Kind of thing. And the point I'm making is the flower this little yellow thing, or is it 20 feet wide and ultraviolet? It's both. And it's neither. It is only that what it is, according to the perceptual abilities of that which perceives it. Now, taking that to its actual real scientific conclusion, what you see, even the color, the texture, even the perception of space and time, is all just a construct of your own consciousness. It's not actually what's there. But we might as well agree that it is, because we all tend to have a similar kind of experience. So yes, that door is there and those flowers are there and the light is there. But in actual reality, that's just how we perceive something. Scientists don't even know what the something is. And that's actually, that I view is actually considered more scientific fact, that we don't really know what the something is. What's really happening is maybe consciousness is perceiving consciousness, and that's how you perceive. I'm getting a bit deep here, but
no, you're not. I want you to go deeper. This is called
that's how I look at the world.
I have a question for you that hopefully will allow it to go even further into deep dialogues. So this is fantastic. Bearing in mind the journey that you've made, because in a sense, chronologically through our conversation, we've spanned from that moment, the 11-year-old child, that book fell off the bookshelves and you carried it forth to your mum, and your mum took the inspiration and turned it into a construct. If we look at the journey that you've been through to this remarkable time, and you've seen the growth through the new age into mind, body, and spirit, now into the human potential movement, which is really what we're describing about. When we look outside of ourselves, we see a screen for our consciousness. It's not happening to us, it's responding to us. So what is the construct of that screen? As you delve deep into that process, bearing in mind what we've just been through, do you have a redeeming, a leading, an intrinsic thought of where you feel human consciousness is at this moment, and how you can bring a moment of brilliance in your own genius to the illumination of what that conviction is?
I believe that we are, as a species, like a light that you're turning the dimmer switch up on. You could, in fact, in some ways, it's almost like a little flower that's just trying to break through the concrete in the sidewalk. And it's just growing, and it's just about to break through. But in the breaking through, or in the turning up the dimmer switch, what is that which brings us to breaking through the concrete? For me, it's kindness and compassion. You know, and that's why I write so much about kindness and compassion. And I simplify it so much. I try to make it as simple as possible, because it is, for me, as simple as that. You know, let kindness and compassion be the spirit that guides the way that you do the things that you do. I don't mean we all need to go around and do random acts of kindness and change the world. Yes, do those things. But it's the everyday things that you already do. Bring the spirit of compassion and kindness to those things, and that turns up your light. And that helps your consciousness and the global consciousness, like the little flower that's just trying to burst through the concrete in the sidewalk. And when it finally does, it goes boom, and it now grows into a beautiful flower out of what seems to be concrete. And I kind of think that we're at that bit. It's concrete and it feels like concrete, but we're just about to poke through the concrete. But what we need to do is embrace compassion and kindness globally, for each other in this moment, for the people right beside you, and for the people you come into contact with. You know, I got that message. I got that idea. I've always been guided by that. I have to say, my mum is one of the most kindest, compassionate people in my, I've ever known. You know, I'm so lucky that I witnessed my mum in sheer poverty when I was a child, doing whatever she could to feed myself and my three sisters and my dad and our family when my dad was in and out of work because of the nature of his job. But I remember, Stuart, that I lost my dog, Oscar, about 5 years ago. And Oscar had bone cancer. It's funny, like, he came into my life 2 days before I started working on a book on self-love. And self-love was something I needed to do for my own life. And he passed away 2 days before I finished the book. So he was in my life for the entire, to the number of days, the entire time I was working on self-love. And if you look at Louise Hay's work, self-love is correlated with bone cancer. And I believe that Oscar came into my life to save my life, to save, perhaps, possibly even save my own energy, having turned inwards. Because one of the initial triggers for all this as well was I met and became good friends with Nita Murjani, who'd had a near-death experience when she said her energy had turned inwards on itself. And I believe in some ways, maybe Oscar came into my life to prevent that happening and took it on for himself. Maybe. I still...
It was turning inwards because
I was resisting loving myself.
Right.
And even understanding what that meant. And really just what happens then is, if you're not being yourself in the world, then you're essentially turning inwards on yourself. As growth naturally happens, if you're not allowing that which you are to come out and flow out of you, then you're pushing it down inside. I think that's what I'm meaning. But on the day that Oscar passed away. We cared for him so much, tried everything we could do to save his life. And despite all I knew about visualization, I did some really cool magical stuff, I would say. But I believe that Oscar was leaving anyway. He didn't actually die of cancer, funnily enough. He caught kennel cough and it overloaded his lungs, and, you know, strangest thing. But he was leaving anyway. No matter what we did, he was leaving. And I remember that when he passed away, we had loved him and cared for him so much. Literally, you know, I would say he burst me right open. That I learned to open up and really love in a different way that I hadn't done before. Like, really, you'd call it opening the heart in a way that I hadn't known. It just felt like I'd been burst open. But what was interesting is it never left me. I remember, you know, shortly after Oscar left, and Elizabeth, my partner, had said that, where's all the love going to go? And I realized that the love I hadn't closed up. I just left myself open. And so all the capacity for love that I had experienced with Oscar had just now continued to pour through and out and settled on everyone and everything that I see. Now to this day, 5 years later, I still feel a simmering sense of affection for everyone. People that I see, I'm looking at you right now, and all I feel is affection and warmth and love and compassion. And I feel that for everyone I come into contact with. Doesn't matter whether someone's offended me, said something rude. My default background, it's like a gently effervescent, like a bubble. So like, I think maybe when you pour a beer or something into water and you see into a glass and you see the bubbles forming very, very fine, it feels like that bubbling, effervescent. I can only call it bubbling, effervescent affection. Now, the intensity varies. Sometimes it's really strong, really prominent, and I can't walk down the street without having a big, broad grin on my face as I smile and nod and say hello to people. But other times it's much more subdued, but it's always there. And I wonder if before Oscar passed away, I wonder if it was always there and I just hadn't really consciously noticed it, or it was something new that was a consequence of the bursting open. But it's never left me to this 5 years ago. And I would say that was an accelerated, call it spiritual growth, that I experienced during that time.
I mean, surely the hypothesis is that it is within us all the time, this extraordinary spiritual toolkit. It's just that life dents our purpose or dints our purpose, and we contract. And then we go through these amazing initiations, and Oscar was evidently an extraordinary gift who came to be with you to awaken.
Yeah,
what a karmic relationship that was. It's like the book falling off the bookshelf when you were 11, but it was a completely different experience.
Yeah, and it's funny because the qualities I'm describing here of compassion and kindness, this isn't something intellectual that I've read somewhere or heard. What I feel and the guiding principle of this energy is rooted in compassion and kindness and affection. And so when I say that I think that what we are being called to do is more compassion and kindness, I'm talking from something that I feel intuitively to be true, because that's the energy that I feel. It's not just something that I've read or something that I've heard. It's an essence that I feel palpable almost every single day. Well, every day.
This is an interesting thesis. I mean, there are many that come from you, but this is an interesting thesis because it feels that in our effulgence, in our evolution at this time, as that, that little sprouting flower bursting through the concrete, the first thing that we're now tuning into is what is true and what is false. How can we register true within us? What, as you were just saying, is this deep sense of knowing? And I would love to engage more fulsomely in the thesis by having, because I can speak right, engender the metaphysical, because that's the whole of my consciousness, working with angels, moving into miracle mindedness and recognizing what the magic of the universe is, that we may register a supernova as being full of quantum quarks and quantum foam. No, as far as I'm concerned, it's a cosmic orgasm. It's all about feeling. And that, you know, if we start to relate to our lives in that way. However, wherever I am today, there is this constant question, which was a question that I was going to put to you, but actually I'd like to open up the questions to the house, as it were, because people are writing tons of things in the chat box, and I want them to ask you questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. Is it okay if we go on over I know, where did the time go?
Stuart, this always happens when we chat. We lose complete track of time.
Because I suddenly thought, wait a minute, how much time do we have? Wow.
It feels like we've just started.
And I wanted to try and steer you towards answering people's questions. There are some very acute statements being made, and wonderful revelations. I mean, there's one from Isabel about her husband having acute myeloid leukemia with a 30% chance of survival. And this was back in the first decade of this century. She had all the family and friends visualizing him in full health, and he's absolutely healthy now, praise be. You know, it's just these wonderful stories that people are so deeply touched by what you're saying. I can't read everything out. Everybody, do you have any questions for David? Okay, so, right, any questions? I love the way that people share, but they write reams. So I'm just scanning a few things.
In terms of what you were saying about truth, as I always ask myself, I get a feeling, a subjective and temperature feeling of warmth. If something is true, it feels kind, and it feels compassionate, and it feels supportive, and I feel it. And I feel it as a temperature in my body as well. If there's something not truthful, my body actually goes cold. I feel it as a kind of, it's not even a temperature thing, it's a subtle physical, subjective and physical feeling of coldness versus warmth. And so I use that as a barometer to guide me sometimes in directions. You know, I find most of the time, if something is true, it feels warm. And there's something nice and supportive, and there's an essence of compassion. In fact, there's almost always compassion there.
I'm just wondering. I mean, this is when you see people write reams and reams. I can't read it. I'm sorry, folks. You just write them so much. So you know the proposition that you're giving us is that if we tune into our kinesthesia, if we really tune into our body and trust the way that we're feeling, that our feelings, as they did when we were children, will always lead us to the greatest, away from the least ill-harming, injurious situation. I mean, I always remember a situation the trust and the innocence that was around during my childhood. I was brought up in the center of this city, London, and it's true, it was in a very nice area, but my mother was a great believer in sending her two boys, because I have a brother who's a year older than I, off into the royal parks, because we were living in St. James's, and we had royal parks. So we would go and get lost for hours, and she would just trust that we would be okay. And I always remember one time there was this person that came along on a bicycle, and I loved bicycles. I mean, I must have been about 7. I loved bicycles. It was a guy on a bicycle, and he called us over and said, would you hold the bicycle? So of course we dutifully held the bicycle. But then I noticed the whole of his vibration changed, and it was purely through a deep feeling basis, and that I began to realize that he was actually about something else rather than fixing his bicycle. And we both sensed it, and we just ran, and the bicycle dropped. And, you know, of course, as boys, we made a great joke of it, because that was a way of being able to laugh out the drama that was potentially going to happen. I feel that all of our children have this. It's just that so often their sensory nature has been depressed by trauma, by illness, by sensory deprivation, and that if we can just simply douse with our bodies, so to speak, so that we know where goodness and where badness, or where truth or where falseness, or etc., just as you're saying.
Yeah.
And that, now, what is your future book? Is that going to be something that you'll embark on?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give away the title yet. I'm not sure if my publisher wants me to tell people what it's called.
If you were to give us no, don't use it. Don't use it, because I can feel and intuitively it's not appropriate. But if you were to bring in a subtitle.
I'm at the moment, I'm pulling together stuff that people tend to be skeptical about, that I think the skepticism is knee-jerk and it's not based on science. And so what I'm doing, I'm taking a number of subjects that people would be skeptical of in the mainstream, and I'm showing why it's actually why it works, why it's true. And where I don't have that degree of scientific evidence, I'm at least removing a lot of the skepticism, and so that people become more open to and patient with people who are trying to bring healing to the world. People are trying to be healers. People who are working in maybe alternative fields. People who pray for other people, and just helping the mainstream to see that there's some real solid basis in this. And so that's what I'm working on right now. The book comes out next year.
Amazing. So when you say next year, when next year?
I'm not entirely sure. It could be May, or it could be the autumn. It depends.
Okay.
It depends on when I can get it finished. I fiddled about with my deadline a little bit. My publisher at Hay House have been really kind to me, and they've allowed me to move my deadline twice, even though that has knock-on effects on scheduling and other stuff. But that's just my process. I can't put out a book until it's finished, and I can't. And they're the same. There's no point in just rushing something just to make a date. I'd rather it was done correctly. And if that takes, and they fully understand that. And so if that takes a little bit longer, then it takes a little bit longer. But at the moment, it should be May, but it might be August or September. Okay, so I don't really mind.
We have something to look forward to, and hopefully by then, our world will be back to a degree of flow. I refuse to use the word normalcy, but to a degree of flow.
Yeah, I like that.
Let's wait and see. David, this has been, as always, the most amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Well,
and
thank
on
you.
behalf of all of our wonderful people, they're all enraptured by what you're talking about. So they're leaving expositions on the substance of what you talked about, rather than, so you obviously have tweaked this vital core. Katie, darling Katie from Ojai, California. We've had people listening in from South Africa, from Utah, from Oregon, from Ojai, California. There was somebody else from Greece, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Katie is saying, you two are bodhisattva. This is so pivotal. Globally embrace. Whoops. Oh, it's suddenly... the thing moved, so I lost it. Anyway, here we are. Globally embrace compassion and kindness. Bodhisattva mean living gods. I believe that you are. David, you have not aged one iota from the moment I met you about 13 years ago. I know that you're a living god. And you were very kind the other day when I nearly, when I revealed that I was Buenos Aires. Thank you. And Australia. Look at all these wonderful people. Okay. Wow. So thank you everybody for listening in. And please, do go to David's website. It's amazing. And lots of really, wonderful comparative information for you. It's drdavidhamilton.com. And for those of you who haven't actually tuned into the other dialogues, please do so. And you'll see not just the men, but also the ladies that appeared with me during the summer. All you need to do is go to dianathevoiceofchange.com. Bless you. David, stay where you are while I just quickly release ourselves from the amazing streamlining.